Hello, and welcome to episode 3 of the Good Girl Deprogramming podcast. I'm your host, Michelle Minikin, and today is one of those solo episodes where it's just you and me, diving deep into the concept of good girl conditioning. If you've been with us from the start, you already heard my story in episode 1, and in episode 2, we had a fantastic conversation with Karen Roundtree, my book wing woman. But if you're just joining us, don't worry, you're in the right place. Today, we're unpacking what I like to call a dummy's guide to good girl conditioning, with a special focus on chapter 1 of my book. We're going to start to explore how these societal norms have shaped us, and more importantly, how we can start breaking free from them. So let's get into it. Growing up, I was the quintessential good girl. I did what I was told, worked hard, got the grades, and never, ever made a fuss. My teachers adored me, and everyone thought I was destined for greatness. But that was all bollocks. I was acting like everything was fine. But in reality, I was struggling and I was miserable. I was an expert at adapting to what my teachers wanted, being the exact type of students they preferred, and completely hiding my true self behind a mask. And over time, I forgot who I even was. Who was the real me? I had no idea. So when I entered the workforce, I carried that same mindset with me. I was the ultimate people pleaser. I never said no, I always took on extra work, and I never, ever complained. I thought that being a good girl would get me ahead, that if I was just nice enough, agreeable enough, and I worked hard enough, people would like me and everything would work out. But here's the thing, people pleasing didn't get me ahead, it kept me stuck in roles where I was overworked and underappreciated. Stuck in relationships where my needs were never, ever met. And stuck in a life where I was constantly exhausted and unhappy. I was trapped in this invisible cage of expectations, and I didn't even know it. Does that sound familiar to anyone out there? So what exactly is good girl conditioning? Well, it's that sneaky set of societal expectations that teach us to be nice, obedient, and oh so agreeable. Basically, the perfect little package that makes everyone else's life easier, except our own. So essentially, it's a set of unwritten rules handed down to us from generation to generation and reinforced by everyone and everything around us. The media, movies, films, TV shows, teachers, friends, everyone. And these rules tell us that we as women and girls must be polite and pretty and pleasant at all times. The 3 Ps. It's like a ridiculous ancient recipe that nobody questions, even though the ingredients are well past the expiration date. And let me tell you, some of those ingredients are downright harmful. So one of the core rules of good girl conditioning is that our value lies in making others happy. Remember that time you said yes to something you didn't want to do, just to keep the peace? Yes, that's our good girl conditioning in action. It teaches us to prioritize everyone else's needs over our own, as if our self-worth is measured by how much we can accommodate others. So here's a little story for you. I remember one Christmas when I was about 8, and I really wanted this one specific toy, and I hinted about it for weeks. When Christmas morning came, I tore open the wrapping paper, and there it was, a slightly different version of the toy that I wanted. Now, old school good girl in me plastered on the biggest smile and said, "Thank you, this is exactly what I wanted." Meanwhile, deep inside, I was a little crushed. But hey, At least everyone else around me was happy, right? So fast forward into adulthood, and of course the stakes are higher. It's not about toys anymore. It's about our careers, our friendships, our relationships, and our mental health. We continue to play the good girl role at work, at home, and even in our friendships. We say yes to extra projects, yes to plans we don't want to keep, and yes to relationships that drain us. All because we're conditioned to believe that saying no would make us selfish, difficult, or worse still, unlikable. When I first entered the corporate world, I was eager, motivated, and determined to climb the ladder. But I quickly learned that being a good girl at work wasn't about being the best. It was about being the most agreeable. My bosses loved that I was always willing to take on extra projects, stay late, and help others, even when I was drowning in my own workload. They'd praise me for being a team player, and I ate it up because that's what good girls do, right? We love a lovely bit of praise, love feedback. But here's the thing. While I was busy trying my hardest to be everyone's favourite, my career wasn't moving forward. I wasn't getting the promotions I should have, and I couldn't understand why. I was working harder than anyone else. It took me a while to realise that I was being seen as reliable, but not as a leader. My desire to avoid disappointing anyone and avoiding any kind of conflict kept me stuck in roles where I was underappreciated and overworked. And let me tell you, the worst part of all was the fear of disappointing others. There was a period in my career when I was leading a small team. I had a great relationship with my colleagues and we got on really well. We were the best of buddies. But as the team grew and the projects became more complex, I found myself struggling to assert authority. I was so focused on being liked and avoiding conflict that I let too many things slide. I wanted to be seen as the cool boss, the one who understood everyone's needs and never imposed too much pressure. But do you know what happened? The team, of course, started to falter. Deadlines were missed. The quality of work dipped. I was spending so much time dealing with the problems. And I realised that everybody was stressed out, including me. My team needed direction. They needed someone to set boundaries and expectations, but I was so afraid of disappointing them or coming across as too harsh, because obviously the worst thing you could be called in a team is a bitch. Like, I would do anything to avoid that. So eventually things came to a head. There was one complaint too many, and I had to make a bit of a tough decision. I sat down with the individual members of the team and had an open conversation about where we were headed. I set clear expectations and let them know that while I valued our friendly rapport, I also needed to step up as their leader. I was failing. And one of the hardest things I ever did was doing that, having that conversation, but it was completely necessary. And you know what? The team responded positively. They appreciated the clarity and our work improved significantly. It was a huge lesson for me. Sometimes being a good leader means willing to disappoint people. It means making decisions that might not be popular, but that are in the best interest of the team and the organization. And this applies to any career, really. If you've always focused on keeping everyone happy, you'll end up compromising your own values and effectiveness and credibility. It took me years to realize that the best way to disappoint others is to constantly disappoint yourself. I mean, how many times have you sacrificed your own needs, your own dreams, just to avoid making someone else comfortable? Just to avoid making someone else uncomfortable, even, almost. So for me, it was too many times. The truth is, in the workplace, good girl conditioning can be a career killer. It keeps us playing small, it keeps us invisible and afraid to take risks. We become so focused on meeting everyone else's expectations that we forget to ask ourselves what we really want. And the painful bit, no one else is going to ask that question for us. We have to be the ones to break free from this conditioning and start prioritizing our own ambitions. Never in the history of work have somebody come along, appreciated all of our hard work, tapped us on the shoulder and given us this promotion. We're not going to be rescued. We need to rescue ourselves. So if you're stuck in a job where you feel underappreciated, or you're afraid to take the next big step because you don't want to disappoint anyone, I'm here to tell you, it is okay to let people down. In fact, sometimes it's necessary. Your career, your happiness, and your success are worth the discomfort that might come along from saying no, or, from heaven forbid, putting yourself first. But here's the truth, and it's a truth that took me years, decades, most of a lifetime to accept. We are not responsible for other people's happiness. I'm going to say that again for the people at the back. Put your listening ears on and listen to this. We are not responsible for other people's happiness. And if that's not liberating, I don't know what is. I realized that the worst thing wasn't disappointing others, it was disappointing myself. By constantly putting everyone else's needs above my own, I was sacrificing my own happiness, my own success, and my own sense of self. And for what? A pat on the back? A fleeting moment of approval? A thumbs up? It wasn't worth it. And that's when I made a promise to myself. I would no longer be the good girl who quietly did what was expected of her. I would be the woman who stood up for herself, who took risks, who wasn't afraid to say no, and who put her own needs first, without guilt, without apology. And that's what I want for you too. If you're listening to this and thinking, this is me, I've been there, know that you are not alone. We've all been conditioned to believe that our worth lies in how well we please others. But that's a lie. Your worth lies in your ability to be true to yourself, to live authentically, and to pursue your dreams without fear of disappointment, yours or anyone else's. And finally, I want to quickly talk about the emotional toll this conditioning takes on us. The constant pressure to be perfect, to never disappoint, and to always be accommodating can lead to burnout. And I've been there, working long hours, put my teeth back in, working long hours, saying yes to everything, trying to juggle it all, and then crashing when I couldn't keep up the facade anymore. It's exhausting and it's not sustainable. But the good news is once you start recognizing these patterns, you can begin to change them. It starts with small steps like saying no more often, setting boundaries, and giving yourself permission to disappoint others if it means taking care of yourself. So if you're listening to this or watching this and nodding along thinking, this is me, know that you're not alone. We've all been there, and it's a process to unlearn these behaviours, but it's so worth it. Because on the other side of good girl conditioning is freedom. Freedom to live life on your own terms, to pursue your dreams without guilt, and to finally put yourself first. So the first step into deprogramming this good girl mentality is awareness. Just recognizing that you're in this cycle is huge. And then the next step, it's about changing those ingrained beliefs. Start small. Say no to something today, even if it's just declining that second slice of cake because you genuinely don't want it. Baby steps. One of the first things I did when I was deprogramming myself was learning to say no. And let me tell you, it wasn't easy. The first time I said no to something, I felt physically sick. I was terrified of disappointing people, of letting them down. But I knew that if I didn't start setting boundaries, I was going to burn out completely. So I started small. I began by saying no to little things, extra tasks, unnecessary meetings, social obligations that I didn't want to attend. And as I practiced, I got better at it. I learned that saying no didn't make me a bad person. It actually made me a healthier, happier person. And guess what? The world didn't end when I started saying no. In fact, my relationships improved because I was being more honest and authentic. So, in summary, good girl conditioning is like that old, outdated software running in the background of our lives, making everything glitchy and slow. So it's time to uninstall that program and upgrade to a new operating system, one that's based on self-respect, self-worth, self-love, self-compassion, boundaries, and authentic living. So I hope today's episode has given you a fresh perspective on what it means to be a good girl and why it's time to ditch that label. We've only scratched the surface, so stay tuned for more deep dives into this topic. On our next podcast, I'm going to be talking to Don Bryan. He's the author of The Secret Struggle, Surviving the Suicide of a Loved One. We're going to talk about how gender-based conditioning has a massive impact on both men and women. It's such a good conversation. You're going to love it. See you then.